And what was that, John? Where had you been?
I had spent from 2004 until 2021 in prison in Wyoming.
Phew. You are listening to the Why Smart Women podcast, the podcast that helps smart women work out why we repeatedly make the wrong decisions and how to make better ones. From relationships, career choices, finances, to faux fur jackets and kale smoothies. Every moment of every day, we're making decisions. Let's make them good ones. I'm your host, Annie McCubbin, and as a woman of a certain age, I've made my own share of really bad decisions. Not my husband, I don't mean him, though I did go through some shockers to find him. And I wish this podcast had been around to save me from myself. This podcast will give you insights into the working of your own brain, which will blow your mind. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm recording and you are listening on this day. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Welcome back to Why Smart Women, where, as usual, we're going to discuss the decision-making traps that even the smartest of us fall for. And we're going to look at ways to avoid them. Today, we have a very, very special guest, Jon Guy, who has stayed awake till 8 p.m. in Wyoming. Thank you, Jon, to talk to me. And he has written a fascinating book called Think Straight, an Owner's Manual for the Mind. And before we get into a big chat with Jon, because his journey is like genuinely, it'll blow your mind, I just want to read something from the beginning of his book. The human brain is easily the most powerful and potentially dangerous tool in the known universe. And nearly every one of us goes our entire lives without the operator's manual. So critical thinking is an operator's manual for learning how to use the brain effectively. By contrast, uncritical thinking has been called perhaps the most unrecognized and unreported global crisis of all. And believe me, listeners, it's got some pretty stiff competition because it leads to poor decisions, wasted time and money, and numerous health complications, including death. Sloppy thinking stifles progress, promotes nonsense, and cripples our independence. Sure, saving money beats wasting it. Believing what's true beats believing falsehoods. Being healthy beats being sickly. Nevertheless, far too many people harbor beliefs that critically undermine these basic truths, which is one reason why critical thinking education should begin in primary school. So I think you and I, Jon, are in violent agreement about this, are we not?
I would say so, yeah.
That was really funny, listeners, because actually what happened was the Zoom froze, and I just thought Jon was riveted listening to my voice and at the unbelievable skill of his own writing, but it wasn't true. He was actually
You're
just
hired
frozen.
as the narrator.
Yeah, okay, yeah, go anytime. Happy to narrate anything. So, Jon, your journey to skepticism is very, very unusual. And I know that I've been on Jon's YouTube channel, isn't it? The Curious Case of Science. Yep.
That's right.
I was a guest where I had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. So no judgment there, Jon, that you only had to stay awake till 8. So I've been on Jon's podcast, no, on Jon's YouTube channel. And when I first talked to Jon about what we're going to talk about, I just assumed Jon was a lawyer or something because his intellect, I did, because his intellect was so sharp. And I actually felt really intimidated to be on that show with all those people, with you leading it. And when I actually said to Jon, are you a lawyer? He said, no, I'm not. And he told me where he'd been for the last 17 years. And what was that, Jon? Where had you been?
I had spent from 2004 until 2021 in prison in Wyoming.
Phew. And how did this how did this come about? Because that's sort of astonishing.
Yeah, so I guess I could just tell you from the beginning. I went
Please.
to Yeah, I was living in California and I was in a pretty low demographic for employment. So finding a job was really tough, and I also had a dog at the time, and it was like going to a job interview was pretty difficult because I was living in my truck, and it's not like you can just leave your dog in your truck in California heat, right? It's just and go to a job interview, right? So it
Right.
was like a matter of like finding a babysitter for the dog and scheduling that with job interviews, and it was difficult. So I had a buddy in Wyoming who was going to a mechanic school out here, and he said he had an extra bedroom, and basically if I could pull my own weight as far as gas and food goes, then I wouldn't have to pay rent. I could just stay in that place until I got on my feet.
Wow.
So I moved out to Wyoming, and I had been out here for about 2 weeks,
Mm.
and I had gotten a job, and I was supposed to start, I think, like the following Tuesday. And Steve and I, that was my roommate's name. Steve and I went out to a party, and on the way home from the party, we ended up getting into an altercation with some people downtown. And that altercation led to me stabbing one of the people involved, and I ended up getting arrested for aggravated assault. And I think Wyoming's a little bit different than California, where you have like different pretrial hearings. And in one of the pretrial hearings, they bumped the charge from aggravated assault to attempted second degree murder. And I ended up pleading not guilty and taking that case to trial. And that was a mistake, taking it to trial. So I ended up getting convicted of attempted second degree murder and sentenced to 30 to 45 years in prison.
Oof. Oh my goodness gracious me. And I think when I was doing some reading about you, apparently the assault in effect was actually quite minor.
Well, I'm not sure if it was minor. I don't think it was significant enough to raise to the level to be charged with attempted murder.
Yeah.
Um, as far as any medical records are concerned, we have evidence that he got 4 stitches and and nothing else. There was some speculation about whether or not his liver had been punctured.
Wow.
Um, I think basic anatomy says that that's not the case. The knife that I stabbed him with was about 2.5 inches long, and I stabbed him in his back, kind of below his ribs. As I was passing behind him, I kind of, or we were passing each other face to face, and when we were passing each other, I kind of reached my arm behind him and stabbed him.
Uh-huh.
So I don't think it hit his liver. I don't think he was a big guy. He was about 230 pounds, I think. Um, and I don't think it hit his liver. So,
And why did you do you remember why you did stab him? Do you remember what
so kind of there were really two altercations. We got into when we first were driving down the street, some guys surrounded our vehicle, and we were in a Camaro, and they started slapping the Camaro, and they were saying like, "You don't know shit about hot rods. This ain't no Camaro." And they were just drunk guys talking trash. So we got out and confronted them. Um, and one of the guys came out of the crowd, and he kind of grabbed me by the arm, and he was like, "Hey man, I've been dealing with these guys all night. Do me a favor and just get in the car and go." And
right,
I've been in his position before too, and I've been in the position of the guys who want to fight before too. So,
right.
I could understand, what that guy was going through. So I kind of just grabbed Steve and decided, yeah, that's not, let's just go. This is just drunk nonsense. So we got in the car, we took off, we made it like a block, and well, I'm pretty sure the same group of people surrounded the car again and were screaming at us and talking trash. So we got out and confronted them. And I mean, to be honest with you, Annie, I don't really have a great reason why I stabbed him, other
Yeah.
than the guy I stabbed was he was the guy who started the first confrontation and had, um, probably the most aggressive demeanor out of everybody there.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know. I just think I was like wanting to be tough. I was in a new town.
Sure.
I had just been there. I didn't like, there was a lot of those people there. There was me and Steve, and then there were probably about 15 of them or so. And I don't know if I was thinking like, cut the snake off at the head or what?
Okay.
I don't know. I
Yeah,
really, I mean, I had been drinking too, right? So I wasn't making great
sure.
decisions at the time. And
And I guess what we know is that you were absolutely in fight flight, right? You were in the fight part of flight, which is real, that emotional brain, the limbic system, isn't it? Response in us. And yeah, so it's sort of easy to understand when you're in that sort of febrile, overheated environment that it's easy. And how old were you at the time when that happened?
I was 19.
Oh my Lord, you were 19. So, and what we know as well about the brain is, especially in males, is not fully developed till they're 25, is it?
That's right.
So that
That's right.
prefrontal cortex hasn't come online. It just seems like such when David and I'll just so everybody knows, we are recording this at the end of the Democratic National Conference. Many of us over here, John, and I'm sure some of the listeners are avid watchers of your political process, because it's sort of so astonishing to us here that Trump is in any way. Um,
Us
um,
too.
yeah, right. Oh,
Man,
wow.
we're astonished too.
Wow, it made me really laugh yesterday. No, it was not funny, but it sort of is. In the middle of Kamala Harris's speech yesterday at the Democratic National Conference, Trump tweeted, "Where's Hunter?" And we're like, "What? What are you? What?" Like, so the fodder for the American comedians is just endless, right? It's just endless. It's like, what are you talking about? Where's your wife? Where's Melania? Where's any of your support network? None of them are
Yeah.
there, right? Because they're all hopefully escaping a sinking ship, right?
Yeah, there was a similar stand-up comedian who she was talking about it. This was like weeks ago, and I don't remember what Donald Trump was briefing or something, but yeah, he all he did was rail Joe Biden, who had already been out of the race, right? So
No.
it was completely irrelevant, and he just was Joe Biden this and Joe Biden this, and we're all kind of just scratching our heads like, what the hell is he talking about this
I don't
for?
know.
What kind of relevance is this, you know?
Yeah.
And
Well, I
and
guess he's
that's
getting panicked, right?
yeah, and that's his MO. He is constitutionally incapable of any like answering a direct question. And it doesn't even seem like he can answer a direct question where the answer would favor him, right? It doesn't even matter. He can't do it. He's just like incapable of answering a question. He just has to spin off into some weird diatribe about something that's completely irrelevant.
Yeah. Well, we loved it when he said, "I'm better looking than her. I'm better looking." Like, okay, I don't think you are, but if you want to believe that, that's all right.
Yeah,
So,
great.
yeah, 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 yeah. So it did, of course, occur to me listening to your story. How many felons has he been accused of or convicted of? Felonies?
Well, he's been convicted of 34, and I believe he has like 56 pending criminal charges.
Yeah. So there's him still running for president of the United States, and there's you with the four-stitch injury at 19 coming in for what was it, 35 to 40 years?
The sentence was 30 to 45.
And you got out in how many?
So in 2000, I want to say 2009, I got a sentence reduction to 25 to 40. And the way that the good time system works in Wyoming is with good behavior, you can get out in 66% of your bottom number, which is 66% of that 25. So that's what I did. I ended up doing 17 on 25.
Wow. So during that 17 years, what you did was quite astonishing. So you started to study law and then you switched to philosophy and science, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
And I've got here that you read something like 300 books on science, philosophy, behavioral economics. Is that correct? That's a lot. That's astonishing.
No,
And
I think it was close to so I never actually counted, right? and a lot of the way that I got books was like people sending me books, and then you're only allowed to have 14 books at a time. So
14. Hmm.
yeah, so I would get books and then donate them to the prison library and do all that. But I did like a rough count one time, and I think I had read like somewhere around like 790 books and like over 10,000 research papers.
Whoa.
And
Right.
that's not just like scientific papers, right? That's like articles, papers, posts, that that kind of thing. And those, again, that was difficult to get to because uh prison administration, they were not a fan of me getting smarter, especially because I
Yep.
had a history of litigating against them. I think I had sued the Department of Corrections 14 times while I was in there, on top of working on all my criminal appeals and stuff, hand in hand with my attorneys. So they weren't a big fan of that. And I remember, so basically I would get a list of research papers or like articles from Skeptical Inquirer or things like that. And I would send them out and then ask people to print them and mail them to me, right? Because we don't have
Wow.
internet access or anything. And there was an occasion where I had to use the prison grievance procedure just to get that mail because they were trying to say that they made up some bullshit that this was copyright infringement for the people to
What?
print. Oh, it's just nonsense, right? It's just some bullshit that they make up to make anything more difficult, right? So
Yep.
it
Yep.
ended up taking me, the prison grievance procedure is, it's slow and it's dumb, and it takes months, and it ended up taking me like 3 months to get these printouts from somebody who'd sent me research papers and articles, and they just don't like that. Anything they can do to make things a little bit more difficult for you.
They do, right? They do it.
They have
I
the
think,
impression that, I think in general, prison staff, they have the mindset that you're not in prison as punishment. You're in prison for punishment, right? So they want to. It can't just be enough that you're away from your family and away from your life, and you're living in concrete, cages with noise and people you don't like and police telling you what to do and all that. They have to further punish you in order to satisfy their own egos.
yeah, wow. Yeah, that's I cannot imagine being not having freedom. I just cannot imagine what that must be like. And the fact that you took that experience and actually turned it into something that was positive, and I use that, I'm careful about the word positive because I think positive thinking is pretty tricky. I know one of the memes that I see all the time over here, and it really deeply irritates me, and I spend a lot of time countering it, is that everything happens for a reason. So it's a sort of offshoot of magical thinking, right? Everything happens for a reason. The universe has provided you with this opportunity for you to learn the lessons that you need to learn. Your life is actually rolling out, is evolving exactly the way it should be, and you just have to trust the process. So in your, I know it's really annoying, isn't it? Because I often say to people, what is that, just white people, or is that people that just spend their lives in abject poverty, or is it just white middle class people who have the hotline
Right,
to the
exactly.
universe? Yeah. So did anybody say that to you about your time in jail was a great lesson, or a time, that the universe was providing you with an opportunity, or do people know that you would have torn their heads off, or what's the deal with that? Does that magical thinking come in your direction, or not so much?
Not so much, not so much now. I think when when people say that, I think it's more, they mean it in in as the concept of it rather than actually being true, because I don't, yeah, I wouldn't, if somebody said that to me and they really thought that that was true, then we would have a different conversation.
Yeah.
But like I have I generally think that it was, um like it was a net gain, right? Because I learned so much while I was in there just by being an autodidact and just diving into just one thing or another. And I was not this kind of person before I went to prison, right? Like most people, well, I don't know about most people, but a lot of people that know me, that knew me before I went to prison and have, seen how I am now, they can't believe the person I am now. And likewise, the people that know me now that didn't know me before prison, they have no idea what kind of monster I was before I went to prison. So
Really? Really?
yeah,
So what,
yeah, I was
so how did you, assuming this is you prior to prison, and you started off with an interest in you were Christian, were you, before you went to prison? You began with atheism, is that the deal?
kind of. I started slowly moving away from Christianity when I was about 16. I can actually remember the exact moment where I kind of just gave up on belief in God.
Uh-huh.
But you don't really you don't just stop all of a sudden, because it's something that's kind of ingrained you from when you're really young, So over the years, I didn't believe in God anymore, but I felt guilty about not believing in God because God could read my
Interesting.
mind. And
Right.
so I never
Right.
really gave up on it. And sometime in my 20s, I wanted some sort of justification for not believing in God anymore. So I started picking up books on atheism, and I liked them a lot, right? Like what I found in those kind of books from like Daniel Dennett or
Yep.
Christopher Hitchens, and the
Yep.
the big, and there's a lot more, but those are the big names. Those are the ones that I started off with. They were saying the things in writing that I had been thinking for probably 10 years. So it really gave me comfort in thinking that, oh, this is this is what other people think too. I'm not the only one that had you know, this epiphany and decided that, God didn't exist. There's no evidence at all that he does, and I should be the one demanding that upon the people who say
Yep.
that he does, right? And that's
Yep.
kind of how I got into skepticism and critical thinking as well, because it's that same demand for evidence on all scales, right? Not just religious beliefs or anything, but just in general. That's kind of the foundation of what critical thinking is about, and I guess that's kind of how I led into that.
Yeah, it's interesting how the whole skeptical, I hate the word journey, but how the skeptical journey occurs to different people. Um, I know for me, I don't come from a religious background. My mother was Jewish, but it just never, my father was a rampant, raging atheist, and it never made any sense to me. So it never sort of got locked into my brain. The whole God thing never embedded itself. So I think it's interesting what you say about this idea, which of course religion is the ultimate magical thinking, is that someone can actually read your mind. And I put belief, I put sort of that pseudo spiritual belief system in the same bucket, because I think religion and the whole belief in the universe is just a different lever that people are pulling. It's still something bigger than you is going to have an impact on your life if you do certain things. Yeah. I know for me with skepticism, and people don't really understand what skepticism is, do they? They think somehow it's cynicism. So do you want to explain in your terms what skepticism actually is and how important it is?
Yeah, sure. I just actually wrote an article about this. The
Oh,
difference.
oh,
Yeah.
I think I might have
Just
read that, but I can't remember it. I haven't got the retention still. Please just tell me in a few words.
Yeah. So there's a big misconception, right? People think that being a contrarian or a cynic or a denialist, those things can really feel like skepticism, right? And
Sure.
I should
Yeah.
probably clarify too that I use the terms skepticism, scientific skepticism, and critical thinking interchangeably because they're
Yep.
basically the same thing.
Yep.
Um, but it really, to the person doing, um, to the contrarian or to the cynic or to the denier, it feels like skepticism, right? If you're questioning authority, if you're disbelieving popular truths or whatever it may be, that feels like critical thinking. That feels like skepticism, right?
Yeah.
But
And
that's
why
not.
isn't it? Why isn't it? Explain why it isn't.
So, for example, contrarianism is kind of a knee-jerk dismissal of anything that's kind of uh, like popularly or like commonly accepted, right? So, like, uh, I don't want to use COVID vaccines as an example, but I mean it really is a good example because the deniers and the contrarians jumped all over it because here's what we know. We know that we have a vaccine. We know we just tested it. It's safe. It works. And contrarians, by their very nature, they want to be contrary to that thing, right?
Yep.
So it doesn't matter if it's safe. It doesn't matter if it's effective. They need to be contrary to that thing. So whereas a skeptic would demand evidence, right? But maybe by way of, I don't know, a clinical trial of 45,000 people, maybe
But that
something
sort of
like
takes a little bit of science literacy, doesn't it, or science interest. I think the COVID vaccine is it's a really interesting example. I don't know what you call them over there, but over here we call them cookers. And these are the people that have a very knee-jerk response to COVID vaccines, to climate change. They're the people that believe that there's chemtrails, that the whatever it comes out the back of aeroplanes is trying to poison us. And the interesting thing, I think, about them is that they will say things like, and then this sort of disinformation gets sort of extrapolated and disseminated out. So they will say things like, well, the COVID vaccine, it was developed, it wasn't given enough testing time, it was developed too quickly. Now, that's not true. That's absolutely not true. It was 10 years, right, in development, and then they just had to really get their skates on to get it out to the public. But it's very easy for people to go into that contrarian state and say, well, it wasn't given enough testing time. They're using it. We're just lab rats. And then that idea spreads. And I think there is that sort of confirmation bias that comes with that is I then feel I've got an identity. I'm not the sort of person who just believes everything the government says. Do you agree with that there's an identity in that?
Yeah, absolutely. And what you said about reflexively, opposing that's kind of what's at the root of the problem there is whereas like skepticism, the foundation on like epistemology, right? Like trying
Yeah.
to figure out what's true and what's false is like basing your beliefs on what we know, what the available evidence is, how credible is that evidence, right? So it's more of like an epistemic pursuit where you value the process of learning rather than just accepting or rejecting anything at face value. Where contrarians at the root, their underlying belief is that they need to oppose something, right? And like you said, whether it's the government or big pharma or whatever, it's just they want to oppose that, right? And being opposed to something has no basis. It has no epistemological basis. It's just knee-jerk
Well, it's a feeling,
contrarianism.
isn't it? And I think,
Sure.
and I think this notion of feelings, or it's the sort of the Dan Kahneman, systems 1 and systems 2 thinking, is that my feelings are always right, and the stronger I feel something, the more I can trust that it's right. And this very much links into one of my absolute pet peeves, which is women are sold this notion that their intuitive response is king. And then of course, if you marry that, and then you get into this sort of contrary state with a group of people that are all opposed to something, it's a very difficult place to climb out of, I think. And we know that occurs very much around vaccines, and around climate change. It's the same sort of thing. It's just very, very easy to go, well, I'm not going to believe that crap. I've got a strong feeling that the government is just trying to trick us. So I don't know where they get this idea that suddenly all the governments of the world are, in violent agreement with each other. I mean, I've been trying to organise 3 girlfriends to go to Newcastle for 6 months and I can't do it. But apparently every government is just going, right, okay, let's inject
Yeah.
people with whatever it is. It's astonishing.
And I think a lot of that is people who have never worked on a project, right? If you've had any kind
Yeah.
of leadership role at any job ever, and you're trying to get people together to do anything, uh, like it's nearly impossible to get like getting everybody on a Teams meeting at the same time every week is, that's a feat in itself. And then trying to get everybody to agree on something in that meeting is, orders of magnitude more difficult.
I
And
know.
the conspiracy theorists, they want us to believe that like it's not just like the US government, right? Because if it were that simple, then Russia would just post the dossier
Yeah.
of exposing us because we're political enemies or something, and so it's got to be Russia is involved too, right? And it's got to be
Everyone
Australia,
has to be involved.
it's got to
Yeah.
be everybody, right? Israel,
Everybody,
China,
yeah, yeah. Everybody
everyone.
has to be involved, and they all have to be simultaneously stopping the cure for cancer for some reason. They're all stopping that. And then
Yeah.
Big Pharma, that's my other favorite, is that Big Pharma isn't to be trusted, but they're all drinking borax or something. Oh my God. And taking vitamins. I don't know about America, but here, the Therapeutic Goods Administration does not have time to be testing all the vitamins, minerals, and everything else, tinctures that people are taking. They don't have time. So there's things on our shelves that have had no testing, that people are shoveling into themselves at a terrifying rate, in a completely trustworthy manner, because somehow it comes under the banner of natural. And as we know, the appeal to nature is a massive, massive cognitive flaw. But vitamins over here are fine, and then Big Pharma over here is not fine. So yeah, John, can you talk more on that, please? David said I'm talking too much.
Yeah, sure. I think it is. I think it sounds like it's similar to how it is in the United States, where
Right.
as we have terms like FDA approved and FDA regulated, right? And some of the alternative medicines that you're alluding to, with some nonsense that hasn't been tested and is on our shelves for people to buy like homeopathic products or something. This stuff is FDA. It might say FDA regulated on it, right? But that doesn't mean it's gone through clinical trials. All that means is basically what you said about they don't have time to investigate every single thing that comes to market, right? So what FDA regulated basically means is that if there's an issue, if somebody gets sick, if somebody gets injured, then the FDA can step in and conduct an investigation to determine whether or not that was the cause of their particular ailment. But we have tons of crap on our shelves that has no business. There's no evidence that it works. There's positive evidence that it doesn't work. And it's sold on the shelves right next to people or to other medications that people buy in similar packages. Like the marketing for these is so similar to the marketing for products that actually do have science and behind them, that people can't tell the difference. And really, can you blame it when giant corporations like the alternative medicine industry, I think worldwide, is like a $34 trillion a year industry worldwide, and that's what you're up against, right? So people that you can't necessarily be blamed for buying these things when the odds the people who have marketed that to them have done that very assiduously. They've tried very hard to make sure that people do buy those things and are confused, and that they can continue to stay in business over it. Like, I think you might have heard stories about, like, I think I talked about one in my book where there was a factory that was taken over by a company that was making homeopathic products, but the factory was previously used to process walnuts, and they didn't go through the proper procedures to clean it. So some people who had a walnut allergy ended up taking some of this homeopathic medicine and having a huge allergic reaction. And we come to find out later that it's a completely unregulated industry, right? Nobody's testing the products. Nobody's pulling samples off to seeing if what they claim is in them actually is in them. There's no regulatory process to inspect their facilities to make sure there's not, walnut oil in the shit that they're putting in their pills. We don't have that, right? So people end up getting sick. and having these reactions because there's no regulations, and it sounds like it's similar over there, which is pretty sad.
Oh, it's terrible. All the homeopathic medicines and vitamins are all on our chemist shelves right next to medicines which have gone through the correct procedure. And yeah, I think just talking to you, because we'll wrap this up in a minute, but just talking to you, I start to get really frustrated because I think, how many voices are there? How many sort of skeptics, science, I put myself in the science communicator basket, as I'm sure you do as well. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Because it just seems like we are up against an avalanche, a tsunami of disinformation and marketing nonsense. And sometimes I feel like a sole voice. Like I worry I'm going to have no friends because, every time somebody says something, I'm like, well, that's not right. Well, that's a myth. Well, that's not true.
I
It's
know that feeling.
terrible. Somebody said to me yesterday about the different sort of learners, which is visual, kinesthetic, and auditory. It's not true. And then I feel, I'm horrible. I feel horrible because I'm like, well, that's a myth. And they're like, well, it makes sense. And I'm like, I don't know, but it's not true. Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah. There was
So what are we gonna, yeah.
there was a woman I work with who, I used to work pretty closely with her, and she would come in and tell me about her meeting to the chiropractor. And
Yep.
I was the job I was doing at the time, I had time to like work and have a conversation with her. So I gave her a lot of information about the history of chiropractic, the difference between mixers and straights, and how mixers kind of integrate modern medicine with Daniel Palmer's original idea of subluxations and innate and all this nonsense. And then whereas straights kind of are adherents to his chiropractic traditionalism. And I had a lot of opportunity to explain a lot of this to her, and she was just like, nope, the chiropractor works for me, and
Yep.
and then it was a few months ago, I think it was about 6 months ago, where she came up to me and she said, you were right about the chiropractor. I said, oh, was I? And I said, did you get hurt? And she goes, yeah, chiropractor messed me up pretty bad. And what do we do, right? What we are up against a huge tsunami of misinformation. And I think, there's some things you can do, like have those grassroots conversations, write articles, donate to organizations that are out there on the front lines fighting against misinformation. You can vote for people who share
Yep.
the same ideas about having evidence-based policies. And I mean, I would exclude myself, but I could run for office, I guess. If Donald Trump can run for office, I'm pretty sure I could too,
Oh,
right?
John, we would move there and I would vote for you. And David would come with me and I'd bring the Groodles and I'd fight for votes for Groodles. Oh, yeah, we'd be behind you all the way. We've often thought David should stand because he's a very erudite speaker, but I don't know if we could actually withstand the political jousting. Now I'm going to wrap that up. I would so love it, John, if you would come and talk to me again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think we've got a lot to talk about. So it has been an
I'd be happy
absolute,
to, Annie.
oh, thank you. It's been an absolute delight. And thank you for talking about your journey to skepticism whilst being imprisoned. It's pretty rare, and we need to immediately make a mini series out of it. And I'm just trying to think, I'm going through the casting thinking who would play you. Any ideas? Let's think about that and we'll discuss it next episode.
Okay.
Okay, thanks very much, John, and thank you to all the smart women for listening. I hope that was an informative and interesting episode, and we'll talk again soon. Bye-bye. Thanks for tuning into Why Smart Women with me, Annie McCubbin. I hope today's episode has ignited your curiosity and left you feeling inspired by my anti-motivational style. Join me next time as we continue to unravel the fascinating layers of our brains and develop ways to sort out the fact from the fiction and the over 6,000 thoughts we have in the course of every day. Remember, intelligence isn't enough. You can be as smart as paint, but it's not just about what you know, it's about how you think. And in all this talk of whether or not you can trust your gut, if you ever feel unsafe, whether it's in the street, at work, in a car park, in a bar, or in your own home, please respect that gut feeling. Staying safe needs to be our primary objective. We can build better lives, but we have to stay safe to do that. And don't forget to subscribe, rate and review the podcast and share it with your fellow smart women and allies. Together, we're hopefully reshaping the narrative around women and making better decisions. So until next time, stay sharp, stay savvy, and keep your critical thinking hat shiny. This is Annie McCubbin signing off from Why Smart Women. See you later. This episode was produced by Harrison Hess. It was executive produced and written by me, Annie McCubbin.